Hello, everyone. I'm Rebecca Ravenel. I'm the board chair of the James Renwick Alliance for Craft. Welcome to our in-person audience here at the museum and to our virtual audience across the country. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you to our co-host for this program, the American University Museum at the Katzen Arts Center. So this event today is organized by the James Renwick Alliance for Craft. Our mission is to foster appreciation, connoisseurship, and support for American craft. And we do that through varied events, trips, talks, and tours. For more information about us, please visit our website at jra.org. So today's program is a double header. We'll be hearing from two accomplished artists working in wood. We invited Jack Mauch to be our distinguished artist for this month many months ago. At the same time, we solicited entries for our Chrysalis Award. And in a delightful coincidence, it turns out that Morgan Hill, the eventual winner of that award, and Jack are studio mates and in a relationship. So do not be surprised if they turn up in each other's slideshows. Morgan Hill will be presenting first. She is the most recent winner of JRA Craft's Chrysalis Award. This award is given annually to an emerging artist in a particular medium who demonstrates excellence in their work and a commitment to developing in unique and dynamic ways. The award comes with a $5,000 prize, which this year was generously co-sponsored by JRA Craft members Brenda Erickson and Barbara Willennon. Morgan mines deep and disturbing themes that many would feel more comfortable leaving unexamined. Her pieces touch on death, abuse, depression, dark topics to be sure, while also leaving room for more uplifting messages of rebirth, healing, and empowerment. In choosing Morgan for the Chrysalis Award, the judges noted her skill and innovation. Her finely crafted conceptual works about difficult themes are balanced by pop cultural references and a separate line of playful wearable pieces, bringing a fresh perspective that is uniquely her own. Morgan will be using her award prize to further support her studio practice since she recently transitioned to becoming a full-time artist. Please welcome Morgan Hill.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, JRA, for this honor, and for all of you that are here. For can I do this sort of? For everybody that's online as well. And thank you to the jurors so much for seeing my commitment to my practice and feeling like that deserves an award. It means a whole lot. So before I start, I want to say that there might be some triggering language and images. So just wanted to let you know that. I am going to tell you a little bit about my upbringing, my education, my influences, and then of course show you the different parts of my creative practice and my work, of course, so we can get started. All right, so I was raised in Arkansas in the Mississippi Delta. My family has a farm there. You're seeing soybeans here. This is a crop that my family produces. I'm an only child. I spent a lot of time alone creating my own imaginary worlds with whatever was around. I grew up very religious. My family is Methodist. On the left is a photo taken the day of my christening. The photo on the right is a gift my grandfather made me. He built all of the tiny furniture in the dollhouse. From this point on, I would also create tiny spaces and small pieces of furniture throughout my closets, in the corners of my room, wherever I could. When I wasn't creating, I was sitting in front of the television. So these are the types of movies and shows that I watched, and I'm still figuring out why I was drawn to campy horror and cult genres, but I think it could have been a somewhat my rebellious nature. But also I was genuinely attracted to anything mysterious, and death was the ultimate mystery. I think I enjoyed religious practices for the same reasons, the mystery, and then the overlap of those two interests were in the rituals, which were a form of creative expression I grew to appreciate. I found it fun to be entertaining the devil and angel on my shoulders. I didn't actually experience a lot of human death in my childhood. I was around a lot of animal death, so hunting was a big sport amongst my family, and there was taxidermy all over our home. In a way, I had really close relationships with these animals, and you'll see this come up again here in a minute. It was obvious that I would pursue a career in the arts at an early age. When I went to college, I started as a drawing major at what was formerly Memphis College of Art. After 2 years, I started getting nervous that it might be hard to find a job with a drawing degree, so I left and majored in interior design at a university. I loved the design aspect, but wasn't all that interested in sitting at a computer. I spent more time doing renderings than anything else, so that's when I found out about an incredible craft program at the University of Arkansas Little Rock, where I could learn more about design, art, and actually have my hands on something. In 2010, I met Mia Hall and David Clemens. They helped guide me to actually finish a degree. These pieces are my first attempts with wood and metal, and taxidermy for that matter, and also with themes that follow me to this day: destruction of some sort and death. I was also realizing around this time that my material instincts were primarily with wood as a medium, although my concepts would always come first. Here are a few of my thesis pieces, all incorporating taxidermy. I had imagined a narrative of a vampiristic character who lived off the service of animals. It wasn't clear in my final show if the animals were intended to be imagined as alive or dead, and if you were the character or someone else was. These objects and others were displayed in an interactive exhibition of what seemed to be artifacts of the character's past life. There was an open taxidermy mount that you could stick your head through, and bullet hole wallpaper. I was questioning our relationships with animals through a satirical narrative. I graduated in 2013 with a BFA in furniture design and woodworking. I graduated quickly for that program because I had accumulated a lot of other credits at the other schools, but I didn't quite feel like I had enough experience with craft. So David Clemens suggested that I take a workshop at Penland School of Craft, so I did that. It was love at first experience, like it is with many people. I took a couple of workshops, then applied and received the 2-year core fellowship. This was pre-Mia Hall becoming the director, so I was lucky to stay and then follow me there. Here's a silly photo of a table in a day event that happens every year now in the wood shop. I started the fellowship in 2015 with an upholstery class. Carrying on with the taxidermy work, I built and covered this massive wingback with 30 mink pelts I collected from stoles and coats. By the way, all the taxidermy is reclaimed or animals that had died from natural deaths and then freeze-dried or mounted. I was able to explore all my material, conceptual, and contextual interests at Penland. I did many installations while I was there. This is an interactive piece that was on the Penland Knoll. You can see some Beetlejuice influence here. I took classes in textiles, metals, wood, and glass studios. I made functional and non-functional pieces. The bottom left photo is of a torture/pleasure device. The piece on the right is a broken shelf called Purgatorial State. I made this during the Trump election time. I learned to carve with a chainsaw, blow glass, bend neon tube, forge, weld, make handbags, you name it. It was an irreplaceable experience. These are small medicine cabinets. The forms are chainsaw carved. The IV bags are blown glass. Here's a table of 99 turned wood stalagmites and stalactites. I was able to explore the subjects that were stirring in me through all these mediums and around a craft community who helped guide me to find meaning for myself. This piece is called Impulse Barrier and is about moments before one would take their life. This was a problematic subject, and rightly so for many people who studied with me at Penland. With the help of my colleagues, I learned so much during this time about the ways to approach others through my work. Although I had struggled with suicidal thoughts in my life, there was much more to consider when making work this provocative, and I'm incredibly grateful for the input of my community. During my final concentration at Penland, I took a concept-focused class with Rachel McGinnis. I created an experience and found that it wasn't death and destruction alone that I was curious about. I was interested in the connection that it allows and the light surrounding it. Death, decay, distortion was a point of fertility, change, and invention. In the experience I created, I asked participants to abandon their phones and flashlights and not to talk while walking across the Penland Knoll to an abandoned barn. There I had installed stairs into the barn loft, a light tent throughout the middle, glowing orbs that pulsed on and off, and covered hay bales for resting. People were invited in and asked to imagine that they were in a liminal space of our lives as we know them and an afterlife. There was a white noise in the background. People could choose to stay as long as they wanted to and do what they needed with that time. This experience was scheduled to happen for one night only on November 1st, and it was requested that I keep it up for a few nights because some people were looking for a sanctuary of sorts at that time. At the end of the concentration, I received a lot of feedback about this piece. It had created a place for people to mourn, find solace, reflect, and pray. I still have letters that participants wrote me. It taught me so much about how to share myself and connect through my work. After the core fellowship, I stuck around the Penland area, worked for some artists, and borrowed time in local shops. I moved forward with these themes, but it became much more personal, so naturally that changed them a bit. At this point, I'm well into adulthood and have plenty of trauma to work from, so it wasn't all that speculative. This piece is about ending an abusive relationship. And there is still plenty of humor and room for pleasure in my work. This design on the left is a hall tree complete with hooks, a mirror, a leather flogger, and a small gold leaf sculpture that might or might not resemble a sex toy. It's called Slick Cleanup. On the right, some scorched candle holders that are simply a design exploration with a texture and color that I love, scorched and black. In 2018, I was lucky enough to receive the Wingate ITE residency that was at the then Center for Art and Wood and is now the Museum of Art and Wood. Here's my incredible cohort, not including Mira Nakashima there in the middle. This was really the first time where I had full access to a shop and a studio. I had enough money and I was allowed to make whatever I wanted without a program or any specifications. That was a freedom I had not felt yet, and it was really incredible. I was exploring wearable art in the form of sculpture and installation. Here are a few sketches. I also did some process art during this residency. This piece is called Collecting Women. It's the result of working through the same abusive relationship I referenced before with the chess piece. But here I chose to create each individual step for a specific woman that had experienced a similar abuse. This is in the museum's collection. Here are some of the wearable pieces resulting from that residency. These pieces are meant to empower and guide the wearer. Here I am feeling empowered. This piece is called Restore Your Agency. It is an installation of small sculptural brooches. Each piece symbolizes a traumatic moment in my life, big and small, from a comment that was made that I won't ever forget to sexual assault and being groomed. These characters represent a force needing to be discarded in the ritual act of burning and to be transformed and replaced as a symbol of guidance, empowerment, and peace. Together, the pieces take on a new form and tell my story. Here, the act of making and destroying is intrinsically linked to my own liberation and renewal. Here's another piece of that same process, but creating a different overall form. When I went back to Penland after that residency, I had a job at the Penland Gallery, but I didn't have a studio or equipment. There were a few of my friends who had equipment, but not a studio. So we all decided to get together and rent a space and share the overhead and whatever else we had to offer. You might recognize some of these craftspeople. A few of us rented together for a couple of years. Then the 7 of us here decided to buy the 3-story building we were renting in. We call that space Treats Studios. It's a building in downtown Spruce Pine near Penland School. We have renovated a lot of the building already and to provide affordable studios to artists. We're also renovating a main floor space. You can see on the bottom right a design. It will be an artist community center complete with a kitchen, meeting area, and lounge. The front will be an exhibition space. We hope to finish renovations this year. We are already providing studios for 14 artists and growing, an artist marketing company, and an artist coach. You can see one of the renovated studios is the bottom middle there. So at this point in the slideshow, I'm going to abandon the timeline a bit and talk about the different parts of my creative practice. And hopefully you'll see the thread that's running through all of them. We'll see. So naturally, any kid obsessed with horror movies and Halloween would also love to dress up. I got started really early. My family is full of musicians and singers, and theater and performing were really important art forms, so this was well supported. Sometime in high school, I started making my own costumes and entering contests. This became a favorite pastime. I was using whatever I could find at my house, trash, thrifted fabrics, to make them, and then I would wear them one night of the year, and sometimes I would win thousands of dollars. When I was in the core program at Penland, I hosted a themed dance party every session. I'd give myself about 5 hours before each event to make a costume on that theme using whatever I could find. I made 16 quick costumes while I was there. You can see on the far left, a Christo and Jean-Claude Surrounded Islands costume for an Art Speak themed party. In the middle is Oscar de la Groucha costume for Garbage to Glitz party. On the right is a Garbage Pail Kids costume for a toy party. I was a organ donor instead of an organ donor, stuffing my organs into a teddy bear. This is me as a bomb queen instead of a prom queen for an 80s polyester themed prom. I won the most flammable award, which was a giant matchstick. So I was really determined to win that trophy. Here's one of my more recent costumes. This is Oscar the Grouch, just regular Oscar the Grouch. Was made from all trash and recycling piles. If I'm in it to enter contests, then I sort of have to be recognizable characters. So I try to get creative in other ways, like using only trash for the ultimate trash character. This costume came complete with Slimy and Slimy's miniature place. And none of the trash you're seeing here is actual trash as we know it. So like the doggy poop bag is paper, and the priority mailbox I made, and the mask and everything. Even though I don't consider these costumes portfolio worthy, so much of my work is wearable art and or performance. So I thought it was important to show you where this originates. So at some point in undergrad, someone asked me to make a wooden ring for them. This caught on and I sold a few of them. And when I graduated, I made wooden jewelry for a little money. And when I was in the core program at Penland, it helped me fund my crazier, more conceptual projects. And despite my hesitation through all of it, this production jewelry practice never gave up on me. During the pandemic, when I needed it the most, and I had a lot more time in the studio, I decided to stop fighting it and make it a real thing that could support me and my artistic practices. So now I have a jewelry business called Bad Habits by Morgan Hill. I never really saw myself making jewelry for a living because for so long it felt too temporal or like I wasn't being sincere to my art practice, but I couldn't seem to quit. I really needed it. It was making me money and I needed money. It was my bad habit. So I thought I might as well make fun of myself a little bit if I'm going to go through with it. And when I admitted defeat, I started to have a lot more fun playing with the themes of decadence. I was able to explore color, texture, and form. I didn't have to be too serious. I could talk about tater tots if I wanted to, or just the indulgence of buying jewelry. But there were also these underlying heavy topics of addiction and consumerism. So all of a sudden, it was everything I ever needed it to be. At the top right, you can see some earrings from my Mega Millions collection, which is themed around gambling in Vegas. Underneath, some cocktail shrimp. Anything can be excessive, so there's nothing off limits. Here are some examples of my earrings. Earrings are my biggest seller and the most fun to make, so I make a lot of earrings. And this collection I donated to the Museum of Art and Wood for an event. The pandemic time allowed me to develop my jewelry business, but the crisis moment we were having was bringing so many things to light for all of us. I found myself looking in the mirror a lot more during this time, actually and metaphorically, as many of us did. This piece is about creating a ritual practice of engaging with oneself each day to promote the change we don't always know we need. It's called Daily Awakening. When the first 9 months of the pandemic, within the first 9 months of the pandemic, I became increasingly ill. I had been seeing doctors for years, but no one was listening and I wasn't getting the care I needed. I menstruated for 9 months without stop and got to the point where I couldn't take a short walk without being in bed for a day. So I sought all new care, alternative health specialist, a new female gynecologist, therapist, and like-minded female friends for guidance. I took a journey over a couple of months with them, and a discovery surgery showed that I was not crazy. I had endometriosis, and I had had it for probably 6 years, and it was covering more than just my female reproductive organs. It was found too late to save those, so I had a total hysterectomy. I buried part of myself in 2021 and started fresh in a new way. It turned out to be a much more transformative experience than I thought it would. I didn't just lose some organs. I felt like I had lost a part of who I was. I began grappling with mourning and celebrating my evolving identity. I reflected on what women in history, the women in my family, and society had given me thus far as a woman entering menopause in one day in her mid-30s. Luckily, I had been asked by 2 different galleries to have solo shows right before the pandemic hit. So in 2022, when they might actually happen, I would have a lot to talk about. This piece is called Attend. It is part of my show titled Getting Ready. I didn't realize how much would change about my body and what I felt about it when I had the hysterectomy. I began questioning why I performed rituals I did my whole life and around my appearance. I started practicing a certain kind of intentionality when looking in the mirror. I felt like honoring myself, my mother, my lineage, instead of punishing myself with tasks of transformation. The dressing room has many tools to help support seeing yourself as you really are. There's the mirror that gives reflection as long as you show up. There's a light that illuminates and informs, and maybe you have something you have to deal with once you get there. I began making the tools I needed to enter my own new dressing room, a room filled with layers of the past. There were mistakes, there were stories, there were all the parts of me and how I choose to have them now. And I allowed the objects to cross barriers of functionality, much like I can. Mirrors can be worn, sconces can be beaded. Myself and the objects could start to blend a little. There are also the items used to adorn. These are called white gloves and party manners, which was also a name of a book that my mom used as a sort of manual for me when I was younger. These gloves are embroidered with thousands of French knots made to celebrate mess, creativity, and self-acceptance. This piece is currently a part of an installation and on view at Penland Gallery's current exhibition. Here are ornaments that might help me express myself better each day. These are all brooches carved from wood to resemble costume jewelry I remember seeing as a child, some layered in paint and memory, some scorched to release a toxic idea of who I thought I had to be. Eyeglasses are another ornament of sorts. I have horrible vision have contacts on today. And I've always had a hard time finding the right expressive glasses, so I thought I should start making my own. These are all reclaimed frames that I've carved and altered. They can hold prescription. Just a plug, if anybody has some old frames that they want a little sprucing up, I'm happy to do that for you. These pieces and a few other pieces formed my first solo show, titled Getting Ready, that showed at Ombre Gallery in Cincinnati. The space was perfect for resembling a dressing room, and I was so glad for this to be in a jewelry gallery where the majority of my audience identified as female. You can see a curtain piece in the back corner. That piece is called Time Out, Time In. It's an invitation to have your own private time out. These days, I have moments, not just during a hot flash, but when I need some time out like my mother would give me. It's a space and a meditative moment to reflect or catch my breath and think about what I did. My dressing room is like that for me these days. At the same time I was making all of that work, I was preparing a 37-piece installation for a different solo show at Gallery 2052 in Chicago. That happened in the same month. This collection of sculptural mirrors is called Witness. I'm going to read from my statement on this piece. Mirrored self-misidentification, or mirror sign, is the delusion that one's reflection in the mirror is another person. I only recently learned that this was a documented psychological condition, even though I have experienced it periodically throughout my life. The first time I felt this bizarre sensation that I can only relate to as a hallucination mixed with the rush of deja vu, it frightened me. After a minute of staring at this stranger that I had seen a million times, the impression faded and I recognized myself as myself again. The second time it happened, I understood that it wouldn't last, and I was able to look at the person in the mirror as a different being, but with the understanding that it was in fact me. This became increasingly empowering each time I experienced it. In these moments, I was able to reflect upon myself like a ghost. My soul was outside of my body. I prefer to think of these moments as precognition or prophecy rather than a mental malfunction, allowing me to see myself in the third person. They help me to realize that I have the power to reflect on who I am and respond independently of my self-identity and the biases and blind spots that accompany it. I haven't felt this sensation in several years, but I can now use the mirror as a tool. This object allows me space and time to see myself with fresh eyes. I invite you to use Witness as an instrument of renewed self-reflection. Lastly, I'd like to share with you a commission that I'll be working on in the next couple of months. I wanted to share it with you because it might be one of the more important pieces that I've ever done. A student that experienced the light installation at the Penland Barn I showed you earlier contacted me to create 2 containers to hold his recently deceased brother's ashes. One container is for him and the other is for his brother's other half-brother he met after his brother's death. The experience I'm having with my work is one where pieces become their own being the moment they leave my body. In my show, Getting Ready, the pieces I made after losing my reproductive organs, I birthed those pieces. The work enters the world and it transforms. I let it go. People receive it in the way they need to. And maybe it comes back and we change each other again. In many cases, I let it go and never see it again. In the case of this commission, there's a life and a being before I even get the chance to start thinking about the work. It's an intimidating project, but an incredible honor and an experience I'm excited to have. The artwork gets to be a connection from me to you, and back to myself, to the past, to past lives, to the future, and to future lives. I feel so honored to be able to share it with you all today, since it's the best way I know to connect. Thank you so much for spending this time with me, and thank you again to JRA for having me.
Wow. You can see why she so richly deserves this award. That was really fascinating. All right. So on to our second presentation. Jack Mauch appears today as part of our Distinguished Artists series, in which we highlight 4 consummate craft artists each season for a demonstration and an artist talk. Jack is at the forefront of changing technology and craft, especially woodworking. Through research and innovation, he's developing new digital fabrication techniques for creating wood veneers that allow shapes never possible before. He brings these skills to his own pieces and shares with others through teaching and redesigning traditional programs and residencies at various institutions. For Jack, both the process and the product can be equally beautiful and engaging. When all aspects of the process are flowing in a state of grace, the resulting work is at its best. We're so happy Jack is here today to tell us about his practice.
Well, thanks, first of all. Thanks, everybody, for being here and coming out and seeing our presentations. And I especially wanted to say thanks to Diane Charnow for hosting us this weekend. She's really generously put us up in her house. So when Rebecca first briefed me on the plan for this weekend, she described the demo that I was going to give yesterday as being about how I do my work, and the lecture today was about why I do my work. And I took a little time to kind of contemplate my work in this sort of dualistic way. And it was interesting, but I kind of realized through doing that it really, for me, there is not a clear way to separate why from how, and that the meaning in my work is really engendered by the process. I imagine that if you like zoomed out and you looked at my career from a great distance, I'd be like a dog that was following a really circuitous but deliberate scent to some unknown place. And that is like the trail of my curiosity. And the idea here is I'm just gonna sort of take you along that trail and highlight some inflection points as we go along. I grew up here in central New Hampshire, just at the sort of southern border of the White Mountains. This is the view from the family house. This house was built near the end of the 19th century. There's a stone hearth, plaster walls, a brick chimney, forged hardware on many of the doors, and hand-hewn timbers throughout the house. It was an environment full of natural materials that were manipulated by skilled workers. I'm the youngest of 5 children in a family that celebrated art making. My parents and all my siblings have creative passions, from cartooning and illustration to painting, sculpture, textile arts, theater, writing, inventing, sort of the list kind of goes on. Anyway, I just didn't have to fight or rebel my family culture in any way to pursue a career in the arts. And in fact, when I decided that I wanted to drop out of high school after my junior year and go to art school instead, my parents were supportive of that choice. And if you're counting, I know I said I'm the youngest of 5, and there's 6 here, and 4 people are my siblings, and I'm at the top there. Right? So I enrolled at the Maine College of Art in Portland, Maine. I was 16 years old on my first day of school. For my first elective class, I chose ceramics. There wasn't an intention in this other than that I had a kind of interest in using a potter's wheel. As it turned out, this choice was really deeply impactful, and not just of my college experience, but of my career since then. Here I am in my little studio in the ceramics department. There are 3 primary ways in which my ceramics education impacted the course of my career. The first is that I fell in love with clay as a material. I had been pretty miserable in high school, and at this time, all I wanted was to delve into a studio practice. So I became kind of obsessed with ceramics. And one part of this obsession was for gaining knowledge, like learning to fire a kiln, glaze chemistry, history of the craft. But more than that, I was captivated by the sensory experience of the material and of the process. Sandy grog grinding between my thumbnail and the potter's wheel, the smell of wax burning off in the kiln room, the feeling just in my muscles while I'm centering clay. The physical and sensory relationship that I have with materials is just a huge part of my creative practice. And a yearning to know a material deeply is one of my driving motivations. All this was one of my first primary experience of that phenomenon. Another pivotal aspect of my college experience was developing an interest and appreciation for the American studio craft movement. I didn't know it when I began studying ceramics at Mecca, but the department was really an outlier at the school, and it was far more aligned with studio craft than with contemporary art. There was a strong emphasis on form, on technique, utility, workmanship, and this craft-centered approach to art making affected me very deeply at a very impressionable time. This is what my family's kitchen table looked like after every semester. The third way that studying pottery has reverberated through my work is in my design process, which always begins with a silhouette. When you are throwing on a wheel, you lean over and you look at your work from the side. The edge of the piece becomes a contour line, and while the clay is wet and spinning, your ability to draw with this line is really unmatched by any other process. You push the line back and forth through space with your bare hands. This way of shaping form became ingrained in me. And even now, when I design on paper or with CAD software, I'm focused on the contour lines created by the piece. Furthermore, my work tends to include a lot of compound curvature and major shifts in volume that stem from pottery as my background. As I go through my slides, you can try to look at them with that in mind. After college, I moved to Cambridge, Massachusetts, and I got a job working for the exhibitions department at the Harvard Graduate School of Design. I'm so grateful to the director of that program for being up for hiring me as a 21-year-old and then giving me enough responsibility that this ended up being an incredibly meaningful experience in my life. I got to help fabricate many architectural installations for the shows like what you're going to see in this series. The shows were often designed and curated by renowned architects with whom I worked closely. It was the first time I worked as part of a creative team, and I saw all that went into pulling off big projects with tight deadlines. Also worked with a really wonderful and generous group of fun coworkers, and it was an amazing experience for me to have at that early stage of my life. But one part of being exposed to the world of contemporary architecture involved developing a skepticism about the way that design is often isolated from the making process. The students we worked with frequently had no ability to design with actual materials or processes in mind because it just wasn't part of their education. It seemed to be a philosophical tenet of the school that how a thing gets made is not the problem of the designer. But then time and time again, we saw this approach fail where in the exhibitions department, we had to interpret designs that were submitted that just totally defied the limitations of the spec materials. I also was kind of disturbed by the students' reliance on digital manufacturing technology, even for very simple projects. There seemed to be a misconception that a CNC router or a laser cutter has the ability to inherently make things well. But they're only tools, and when the operator doesn't have a lot of skill, the project tends to look bad no matter how well it was conceived or designed. These experiences, for me, really reaffirmed my sense that there is power and there is integrity in cultivating manual skills and material knowledge. After working at the GSD for a few years, I became anxious to return to my own studio practice. I had taken a wood firing class at Penland when I was in college and learned about the core fellowship program, which stuck in my mind as an amazing opportunity at an idyllic place. I decided to apply and I thankfully was accepted into the program. I applied with an entire portfolio of ceramics, and I had every intention of studying ceramics when I was there. But when I was finally confronted with the reality that I could work in any studio at all, I just found myself enticed by so many other media. So I took classes in steel fabrication. Some of you might be able to guess that the instructor of this class, Vivian Beer, in metalworking and tool making, in pewter smithing, in fine bookbinding. And then I started to combine these techniques. And over the course of my 2 years there, I developed a broad understanding of craft processes. I stopped believing that I had to limit myself to the tools that were typically associated with a given material. And I realized that craft technology is really quite similar across most media. Similarly, I found that my designs began to transcend specific media. I would explore the same themes in pewter that I would in wood. and in tools and utensils, and then in furniture. This side table, I think, is a sort of good example of how my work continued to be influenced by pottery, with this focus on curving contour lines and shifting volumes. And of course, if this all sounds sort of familiar to Morgan's story about her core experience, it's not a coincidence. It was similar. And it's one of the really amazing and unique things about that program, is that you don't have to declare a focus in a particular media. You can have a broad exploration. I also began to see levels of detail beyond what I was previously capable. And I mean this actually literally. I believe that as your skill and your attention grows, your ability to perceive nuances of detail heightens, and all of a sudden you can see things that were previously invisible. It's not obviously due to like a change in ocular acuity or in lighting conditions, but just in what your brain is capable of noticing. It wasn't only that my ability to see detail grew, but it became something to strive for. And I would say now a major tenet of my studio practice is having a willingness to search until I find a flaw in my work. And I know this might sound like sort of an unhealthy practice, but for me, it's just about accepting that there is an inevitable point where my skills fall short. And I think that if I find that point and I scrutinize it, then my capacity to see and attend to detail just continues to grow. And that is a process that I would like to continue. One of the most influential classes I took at Penland was an 8-week concentration with furniture maker Brian Reed. In this class, I learned to create patterns and images with wood veneer. Pattern, veneer, and marquetry have remained at the center of my woodworking since. I have just a couple other tables from that very influential 8-week class that I took with Brian. And also, I just can't overstate the social impact of my time at Penland. I made so many personal connections and professional connections, and they just kind of have reshaped my life and my career. And this was my cohort from the first year there. Many of these people are just my dearest friends. This is the final piece I made in my core fellowship. It was a collaboration with Liz Kerner, who was another core fellow at the time. And I just want to draw your attention to the legs here. We chose to make the stock for these legs from many small pieces of walnut rather than laminating up a few large ones. And it definitely made for an interesting pattern on the surface when shaping the legs, especially where those pieces were kind of contrasting their neighbors. And what you'll see as I go through is that this idea actually ended up being kind of the seed for a lot of my future woodworking. So I finished the core program in 2013, and this is the next piece that I made after that. And in this piece, I attempted to explore that idea further, but to exaggerate it by using far more strips of wood. But this piece ended up engaging me for other reasons. The legs of this table are actually made from one single piece of air-dried walnut. Walnut can contain a vast array of colors, ranging from deep brown to purple to gray to a light cream color. That's the sapwood. And this piece contained just the whole spectrum throughout the kind of cross-section. As I began dissecting this piece into hundreds of parts, I felt more like someone performing an autopsy than making furniture. Wood is a fascinating material because not only does each species have a different quality, but each tree is an individual that experienced a life of unique circumstances that are evident in its body. The body of a tree also happens to be a timeline, which holds so much insight into the ecological history from its lifetime. And I wondered, what are the implications of so radically rearranging this history? There's an essay by Aldo Leopold that's called Good Oak, and it really beautifully illuminates the idea of wood as a historical record. And I want to just quote a passage of it here. And in this passage, he describes felling a tree on his farm that was struck by lightning and killed. Fragrant little chips of history spewed from the saw cut and accumulated on the snow before each kneeling sawyer. We sensed that these two piles of sawdust were something more than wood, that they were the integrated transect of a century, that our saw was biting its way, stroke by stroke, decade by decade, into the chronology of a lifetime, written in concentric annual rings of good oak. Throughout the making of this piece, I ruminated on these ideas that the material I was using is a body, and that by rearranging its substance to emphasize visual contrast, I was inevitably rearranging the course of history as recorded by that tree. And I've really held on to both these concepts throughout my woodworking career. When a piece of wood warps as I cut through it, I'm definitely annoyed, especially if I have to like make another trip to the lumber yard. But I also can't help but imagine that tree in its tree form on a hillside, sort of buffeted by wind, so that to produce that tension that was in it that caused it to warp. And these ideas keep me engaged, and they really help me love that material, and they also help me accept the frustration of using a material that changes its shape and its size and its color on sort of a daily basis while you're using it. So after completing that table, I was in a difficult situation because I was in a residency and I was expected to work every day, and I wanted to finish this residency, but I was having a sort of a mental health crisis, and I was really unable to have the physical energy at that time to do woodworking, to be in a machine room and move heavy things and do that process. But I turned to veneer at that point because I knew that I could at least sit at a desk and I could cut veneer. I was sure I could do that. So that's what I did. I started cutting veneer. From the previous piece, I carried that idea of cutting hundreds and hundreds of strips of material. And then I just started taping those strips back together. And then I started cutting them apart again. And eventually, I taped them together again. And my goal became I kind of got it to the point where I just wanted to process this wood until it totally lost its original character and it became flat and graphic, like a print. And this is the finished piece. It's a panel, it's about 30 by 30, and it contains more than 7,000 pieces of veneer. And after making this piece, I was more interested than ever in using veneer as a primary medium. And I realized that I didn't necessarily have to be making furniture. The veneer could take center stage. Here's a detail. And for scale, the strips there are about 1/8 of an inch wide. Shortly after this, I participated in Haystack's Open Studio residency. I was still cutting veneer into little pieces, and another resident casually mentioned this technique, sand shading, which I had heard of, but I had never actually tried. And so I was able to get together a pretty rudimentary setup, just finding a hot plate from the dye studio there, and I got a can from the kitchen recycling, and I got some silica sand from the clay studio. And I was able to do this technique. Sand shading is a process in which veneer is burned in hot sand. And because the sand is hottest near the heat source and gradually cools, it burns a gradient. It's often used in marquetry to create the appearance of volume. But I treated it more as just a simple graphic element. And I couldn't believe how many interesting patterns I could make using just such a simple module as a strip of wood with one burnt end. And I just started making endless samples using this technique, all kind of the same thing, strip of wood, one side had a sand shaded end. Eventually, I started to include marquetry as well as sand shading, and I started purposely making surfaces that were really sort of visually jarring, where they were almost kind of uncomfortable to look at. I like the idea that I could transform wood that we feel usually is a sort of benign and comforting and ubiquitous material into something that was almost noxious to look at. And these images are in focus. They just it's hard to get your eye to settle on any part of the image. And right around this time, I was honored with a commission that turned out to just be perfectly timed to explore these ideas further. And this is the resulting piece. And while it doesn't look that different in these samples or from the samples in this image, it's on a totally different scale. This piece is 6 feet wide and it's 7 feet tall. And I have a video here that will describe the process of making this piece. This video was made by Jesse Beecher, who is one of my oldest and closest friends, but also is an incredibly talented filmmaker in Boston. And our studios were just near each other while I was making this piece, and it was just an incredibly fun collaboration to do with him. So yeah, as you can see, it's a door, and this piece was commissioned by a dear friend of mine, Kathy, who was here earlier in the weekend. Some of you might have met her. Although this piece was an achievement for me and I was very proud of it. I did start to feel at this time that I had a problem with this piece and with all of this veneer work that I had been doing, which is that it was flat. Those qualities of design that I've mentioned earlier, like dynamic contour lines, shifting volumes, graceful silhouettes, these were all absent from this work. And none of my interests as a designer of 3D objects were being satisfied. So I began on a series where I tried to get away from flat and rectangular panels. I experimented with the edges of marquetry surfaces and how I could be dynamic, how I could make those kind of more dynamic than with straight lines. I also sought to make pieces in which the veneer surface was not applied to a substrate as much as it was the entire object. I focused on preserving the thinness of veneer in the final form. And I also finally started to move away from flat planes. This became critically important to me, to be able to do patterned veneer surfaces over compound curving planes. Veneering a single curve is not really an issue. It's just like if you tried to roll a sheet of paper up into a tube. But veneering a double curving plane gets quite challenging because the veneer does not stretch or compress at all. It would be like wrapping a piece of paper around a balloon. It would crumple up or it would tear before it conformed to that shape. So my first approach involved starting with flat sheets of veneer and changing the surface geometry by removing darts of material. This box here is the first true compound curving plane that I've veneered. It's like a very gentle one, but that top is going in two directions. In this photo, you can kind of see that I would remove darts of material at the edges, and that would allow the edge to shrink a little bit, and then I could veneer a kind of gentle dome shape. And I started pushing this technique as far as I could, but I found the limits of it pretty quickly. It was imprecise, and it created so much stress that the taped together pieces would just pop off before I could glue them down. I needed a way to both shrink and expand the surface geometry to fit more complex forms. And I started thinking back to my experience at the GSD, and I was just sure that there would be a way to do this using 3D modeling and digital manufacturing tools. But with no experience in that realm myself, I didn't really know where to start. I was extremely fortunate at this time to receive the John D. Minnick Furniture Fellowship from the Society of Arts and Crafts. And this allowed me to embark on a year-long independent study and also to buy a CNC router. So here are some shots that just illustrate the process that I eventually developed. It took a long time, but I would start by modeling a curved plane. And then from that model, I could use a CNC router to mill a bending form. Then I would return to the model and I could divide that surface into smaller parts that could be virtually flattened using some specialized software. And then from these flat patterns, I would cut veneer. And in this case, I'm starting to create the panel, basically just a substrate for a decorative surface. Here you can see the different layers or plies, which alternate grain direction, just like a real piece of plywood. Returning to the model a third time, I divided the surface into a pattern. Although veneer doesn't want to conform to a compound curve, each of these segments is so small that the amount of curvature isn't an issue. And these pieces are then cut with a laser. Because the geometry has been distorted so much, they won't fit together at all on a flat plane. But as I tape them to each other, they start tessellating a curved plane. And it's a plane that perfectly matches the substrate and the bending form because everything points back to that original model. Here's a little, you can just kind of see the geometry in this video. And so here's the result of that piece. This technique was actually sort of more successful than I had expected. And I was so happy that I could finally combine my interest in veneered surfaces with my interest in curvature and with volume. And just another couple images here of work from that series. This is just a piece in process. And this is a bowl that I made in the residency at the Museum for Art and Wood in 2018, which is when I met Morgan. And this piece is in the museum's collection, which is really a great honor. Is that sound coming from the speaker? No. Yeah. So this brings me to the most recent period here, which I'll just say has been really different from what I would have predicted. There were some pretty big events just in my life over the last few years. So, for one, I found myself in a promising new relationship. And then I got a great new best friend, and I ended up moving back to North Carolina. And I set up a new studio in North Carolina. It's a lot of work, as you can see. I coped with a global pandemic as best I could. I had a pretty bad cycling accident and then a subsequent surgery. And a little more than a year ago, I ended up co-owning Treat Studios with the group that you saw earlier, which, and as you know, it's a 10,000 square foot commercial building in downtown Spruce Pine that we have been renovating into artist studios. And it is great excitement, but it's also been a great part of life and work the last few years. But in my creative practice, things also took kind of an unexpected turn, which is that I became really fascinated with digital fabrication, and specifically with how transformative it can be when it's used by artists and craftspeople who already have a deep knowledge of materials and a capacity for complex and sophisticated processes. It turns out that, like the students at the Harvard Graduate School of Design, I had kind of a misconception about the tools as well, which is that I thought somehow they led you away from craftsmanship. But as I said earlier, they're only tools, and they can be used with all the skill and all the sensitivity that we find romantic in traditional processes. For instance, I had just seen so much laser cut marquetry that featured a burn mark around the edges of each piece that I thought it was inherent to that process. But when I started doing it, I realized that a burn mark is not inevitable. If you are careful, if you dial in the power, if you cut from the correct side, if you mask the surface with tape, et cetera, you can just eliminate that. And it's like anything else that any other time we're trying to craft something well, you just like take your time and you're careful at every step. So now some of what I do with these tools is definitely is kind of a straightforward manufacturing process. And I think this is definitely one really great way that craftspeople use digital tools, especially those of us who are trying to make a living as small scale manufacturers. It gives you all the precision of industry, but with the flexibility of an individual or a small or a craftsperson. And it permits making objects that would otherwise be prohibitively time consuming to make, like this butter dish, for instance. There wouldn't really be any way for me to make this and to sell it at like a butter dish type of price if I was carving it by hand. And I don't know if I could carve it by hand. But more than direct manufacturing, what I'm really interested in is how to integrate digital processes with traditional ones and with hand processes. So 3D printing, for instance, and mold making, that combination, 3D printing and mold making, is really compelling because the casting process erases the 3D printed look, and it also can render that object in a more permanent and appealing material. This is a shot glass that has a weighted bottom, which keeps it upright. And I made these while I was in a residency at a boat building school in Rhode Island. And I didn't think of this, but a bunch of people pointed out that it would be like the perfect cup to use on a boat. Stay righted. So these last images I'm going to show are two of the furniture pieces that I've done since moving back to North Carolina. All these projects rely heavily on the use of digital tools. And although these processes are integrated with a lot of traditional processes and hand processes. This table was a commission, and the client gave me carte blanche on the surface design. And so for better or worse, I bit off a big chunk. This is like a year and a half later. And it was definitely one of the more ambitious one of the more ambitious marquetry projects that I've taken on. In the end, there's over 20,000 pieces of burnt wood in this. I've been really fortunate to have some clients who allow me all the leeway that I could want in terms of design. And for those of you who were at the demo yesterday, you might recognize that this is butternut, that wood we used, and you can see in these images how much that reflective quality adds to the surface. This table I really enjoyed making, and I found a lot of ways to integrate digital processes into this project. All these curved parts that fit together, previously I would have made a lot of jigs and a lot of templates to make that work. But now, since all these cutting tools reference the 3D model, I don't make templates anymore. And the string inlay, for instance, is able to land right on the seam between the pieces of veneer because although they're totally separate processes, they're all driven by the same information. And this is actually a tilt top table. The table flips up so that you can push it aside, but it can still remain displayed. And here's the back with the mechanism and the hardware. And I was really particularly happy with the base of this table. It took a long time for me to get to the point where I could, with CNC, create these same kinds of free-flowing forms like I used to do with hand tools. Here's just a couple of process shots so you can just sort of see what that looks like when I'm making it. And if you in the left-hand video there, you can sort of see some of the shenanigans that I get into trying to cut forms that are complex like this on a 3-axis CNC router. So as incredibly pleased as I am to have gained the knowledge and the ability to use all this technology, I've recently been feeling sort of caught in a trap that's caused by this way of working. And essentially, it sets up that same dichotomy that I found troubling when I worked at the Graduate School of Design, that the design process and the making process are totally separate. And even within my one-person practice, I've set up this system of dual roles in which there's a designer in an office coming up with ideas, and then there's a workman in the shop executing those ideas. And even though these two fellows are great collaborators, and really respect each other's skill sets, they're both feeling a little sick of their job right now. And to illustrate that, the image on the left is the design for this table, and then the image on the right, and it's a computer rendering, was not made, and then the image on the right is the finished piece. And so you can just see that there's not like a lot of sudden inspiration or surprises in this process. And then I just wanted to end with this piece, which I made last year, also for like Morgan, for the Museum of Art and Wood's annual bandsaw box auction. And this was one of the few pieces that I've made in the last 4 years where I just didn't use any digital tools at all. And it was such a joy to remember how exciting it is to reveal a form and discover the piece actually while you're making it. Where design and making are just one process. And so I'm definitely making it a goal in the next year to return to this way of working intentionally for at least some of my projects. And that's like as far as the descent trail goes. So thanks.
Thank you both. This has been
A treat.
yeah, this has been a treat, and we've heard so many amazing and insightful things about how not just an artistic practice, but life in general and how to navigate. So thank you again, Morgan and Jack.